money's always been an issue on my mind.
I don't really know what the future is going to be.
I don't feel that people really have a strategy for retirement. It's more of a strategy for survival.
I definitely kind of fear for my retirement ages.
There's just a lot of uncertainty.
Like always thinking about saving, I have my savings already started.
Retirement is something I'm conscious of.
Credit card and
Tuition,
Gas.
Food is more expensive. Grocery bills.
Price of housing.
rent. I've talked to my parents about probably living at home for 5 years after I graduate, just to save up money to move out.
I don't know too much about it, but I've heard of it.
I should know a little bit more. I've been paying into it for many years now.
I'm very uneducated on it.
No, I don't know too much about the actual pension plan.
I really didn't give it much thought.
I know it's an integral part of many Canadians' retirement plan.
It's a good base to start from. To use that as a base, but build your own retirement systems beyond that.
That it should be invested in something that will help secure our life in the planet.
I'm like pretty cautious, so I would personally feel more comfortable with like slow and steady growth.
Be widely diversified in terms of asset class and geography.
I think we have to be invested in a lot of things.
Gives more information to people as they get closer to retirement.
Are we investing in sustainability? More transparency to the common guy that's been investing in my pension for many years.
20 years ago, an independent professional investment organization was set up to invest the Canada Pension Plan on behalf of the millions of working and retired Canadians. It had a very clear goal, which is to earn the best possible investment returns. And today, CPP Investments invests across public equities, private equities, bonds, private debt, real estate, infrastructure, and many other areas, all in order to build a resilient, globally diversified portfolio and to grow the CPP fund to help ensure the financial security of millions of Canadians now and for generations to come.
Hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Tara Perkins. I'm a Managing Director at CPP Investments and the Head of Global Public Affairs, and I'm going to be moderating this meeting today. I'm here with the Chairperson of our Board of Directors, Heather Munroe-Blum, and our Chief Executive Officer, John Graham. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the lands and traditional territories of the Indigenous peoples in Canada. And we would also like to pause to thank all of you for taking this time and joining us today. We hold public meetings regularly for every province that participates in the Canada Pension Plan. In fact, we've just done so coast to coast over the course of the last month. But we are particularly happy to be here today because it's our first ever national virtual public meeting. And that video we played at the outset gives you a sense of some of the sentiment and the questions that we've been taking from Canadians. And we're really looking forward to hearing what's on your mind today and your questions. So to submit those, please click on the bottom blue icon on the bottom left-hand side of your screen for questions. And please keep those coming during the course of this meeting. I will say we received a large number in advance, so another thanks to those of you who went to our website and submitted questions in advance. And so we know we're not going to get to all of the questions that we received today during the course of this webcast, but we do plan to respond by email to those that we can't address live at this point. And then if you find yourself having questions when we're done the meeting today, we'll be sending you a feedback form and a survey where you can put additional questions in. So while you're submitting your questions, and just before we start on those, maybe I'll turn to you, Heather and John, to share some perspectives on some topics that we want to make sure we cover. So Heather, you've been on our board for more than a decade now. You've been the chair of the board for most of that time. Can you share some of your perspectives on governance at CPP Investments, and particularly what makes our organization unique?
Thank you very much, Tara. And before I turn to your question, let me also thank all of our viewers today for joining us and participating in our national public meeting. It's been a real honor for me to serve as a member of the board of CPP Investments for 11 years now, and for the last 8 as chair. Our goal remains clear: to provide the highest standard of governance and oversight, to ensure CPP Investments continues to act in the best interests of the 21 million Canadians who contribute to or draw on the CPP fund, and in particular, those of you who rely on it for financial security in retirement. Our governance structure was carefully designed to support the important mandate of CPP Investments, that is to invest the assets of the CPP fund and maximize returns without incurring excessive risk. And a key element of that is that CPP Investments operates at arm's length from federal and provincial governments and is guided by the independent, highly qualified, and professional board of directors that I'm privileged to chair. The assets in the CPP fund are also strictly segregated from all government funds and protected from any political interference.
Thank you for that. And can you speak a little bit more maybe about the composition of the board and the individuals on it?
Well, we have a terrific board of experienced individuals with the necessary set of competencies and skills and experience to provide effective oversight of this publicly serving global investment organization. It's a diverse and dedicated group. The individuals bring a wide range of relevant professional backgrounds and global business experience, which is very important. And we collectively pay much attention to ensuring that together we have the experiences to effectively guide the organization. And I might add that every director, whether they're a couple of our international directors or the majority of domestic directors, cares deeply about the public service mandate of CPP Investments.
And just before I turn to John, Heather, are there one or two highlights from this past year that you'd like to share with us?
Well, we very much work to remain at the forefront of global governance by upholding rigorous standards and taking into account evolving best practices, regulatory changes, and stakeholder expectations. And while we're recognized globally as leaders in governance, we are constantly aware that there is no room for complacency. In thinking about the last 2 years, two events of the last 2 years, I'd say that one of the highlights for us is that CPP Investments was honored to be recognized as the top in the world amongst the top 75 pension funds in global pension transparency. This benchmark ranks pension funds in 15 countries on their transparency and the quality of public disclosures relating to completeness, clarity, information value, and comparability. We're absolutely committed to the value of transparency and open dialogue, and we're ever mindful of the important role entrusted to us to help ensure the CPP remains sustainable for future generations. I'd say as well, over the past year, one of the highlights has been our work on sustainable investing, but I expect we'll get more to that as we go forward.
I'm sure we will. So John, maybe we'll turn to you. It's been a very difficult year for financial markets, very difficult year for economies around the world, very difficult year in geopolitics. Can you talk a bit about the fund's performance amidst this?
Great. Well, thank you, Tara. And let me first also say a very warm welcome to all of our viewers today. And this certainly hasn't been an easy year for most Canadians. We've all felt the impact of COVID, the devastating war in Ukraine, and soaring inflation. And these global events have triggered increased volatility in the financial markets. And it's one of the most challenging years in the last half century. And while the fund is not immune to widespread declines, CPP Investments preserved value for the CPP fund. We designed a diversified global investment portfolio capable of weathering all types of storms. So that means if one market, one asset class is facing challenges, another one is often reaching new heights. Now, this prudent long-term approach contributes to a consistent, solid performance. In our most recent quarter, which ended on June 30th of 2022, the CPP fund had assets of $523 billion and earned a 10-year return of 10.3%. In the 5-year period up to and including the first fiscal quarter of fiscal 23, CPP Investments has contributed $171 billion in cumulative net income to the fund. And over a 10-year period, over the last 10 years, we've contributed $305 billion to the fund on a net basis after all costs.
Thank you. And I think the topic that we've actually received the most questions on in advance of the meeting today is climate change. So can you talk a bit about our approach to climate change and maybe some recent developments?
No, I'd be happy to. And I think one of this year's announcements we are most proud of is our commitment to sustainability. Our investment portfolio will be net zero by 2050, and our internal operations will be carbon neutral by March 31st of 2023. To help drive that, we've created a Sustainable Energies Investment Group, which aims to boost our investments in green and transition assets to roughly twice their current level by 2030. We're also investing in innovative technologies. For example, we have a commitment of more than $32 million to Hydrostar. This is a long-duration energy storage firm that's contributing to the decarbonization of electrical grids around the world. We also formed a long-term partnership with Octopus Energy Group, and there we've committed $810 million to the green energy company in both direct investments and a renewables development partnership.
I wonder if I might just add a little bit there, John, because I know our viewers are very interested in the governance oversight of sustainable investing. And I want to say that in the context of my long time on a range of corporate boards across sectors, that the engagement the board and management had a year ago, September, in determining what the sustainable investing framework would be was one of the most productive and collaborative processes in common cause for our mandate. And in particular, I'd say that dynamic that acknowledged that others were rushing to sign on to the net zero 2050 commitments. At the same time as we all understand everybody has a role to play in managing climate, that there is a lot we don't know about how we're going to get from here to there, that it is a global collaboration in a sense to do that, and that we wanted as you say, a diversity of approaches that would also allow us to learn about what's working and what isn't, to share that learning with our partners, and to be real leaders as we move forward. And I have to say the Grey to Green strategy was a point of big debate, but one that has such substance in helping us to really reach the goals by 2050.
Yeah, I think we've certainly believe we've landed on a approach that is fit for purpose for CPP investments, fit for purpose for our mandate, and allows us to be a constructive investor in the global economy transition.
Yeah, thinking about our mandate all the time.
Great. Well, you both know we prepared a video on our approach to sustainable investing, so why don't we share that now?
Sustainable investing is identifying assets that we are confident will deliver long-term attractive returns because management teams are proactively identifying and managing risks and opportunities in their industry and business model.
The most significant change in how investors are managing sustainability issues in the past 2 years has been a broad awakening to the role finance needs to play in decarbonising the economy. There are 4 key actions we are taking as part of our commitment to deliver net zero. The first is reducing and offsetting our own operational emissions. The second is to double our green and transition assets to $130 billion by the end of the decade. The third, pursuing a decarbonisation investment approach. And lastly, committing to our role as active investors, where we invest and exert influence rather than pursue blanket divestment.
A great example of our active ownership is our climate change voting policy. When we introduced this new voting policy in 2021, we clearly articulated our expectations of boards with respect to managing climate change-related risks and opportunities. While this policy resulted in votes against 65 directors this past voting season, it also led to material commitments and improvements at 35 companies. Clearly articulating our position, expressing the seriousness of it through a voting practice, and engaging as an active owner led to direct action consistent with long-term value creation at our portfolio companies.
As a citizen, I'm deeply concerned about climate change and its consequences. As a CPP Investments employee, I'm passionate to champion and contribute to the fund's pathway to its net zero target. The fund is exposed to climate transition risk defined as the company's valuation impact due to the change in the carbon tax or abatement cost, and climate risk due to extreme weather events as a result of global warming. But it's not just risk. Climate change also presents great opportunities to add value to the fund. We consider an asset green if more than 95% of the company's revenue is derived from green activities defined by the Green Bond principles. We consider an asset transition if a company is in the high-emitting sector but committed to achieve net zero by 2050 with a credible and certified plan to get there.
When we took ownership of the Trafford Centre, we realised that there was a significant value creation opportunity for us to really integrate the sustainability agenda into the strategy for the centre. What's been unique about the way that we've approached the net zero strategy for the Trafford Centre is the absolute commitment to transparency and honesty that we're taking with ourselves, with our tenants, as well as our consumers. We won't try to make claims that we can't substantiate. We've done the diligence, we've done the work, and we have confidence that we can achieve the goals.
We're committed to working with our portfolio companies as they navigate the path to net zero.
We are well positioned to tackle the challenges with making improvements in this area because of our institutional experience with companies at different stages, as well as our long-term focus.
Together, we help ensure the fund remains sustainable for generations.
So I think we can start taking the questions that are coming in and are in the queue now. And Heather, I think this first one maybe we'll start with you. This comes from Gwen in Ontario. And she says, too many seniors live in poverty. Can the CPP payment be increased for those in lower tier incomes?
Gwen, thank you very much for that question. I understand completely where it comes from. I want to say at the same time that CPP Investments and our board do not govern the Canada Pension Plan. If we think about its contributions to stable retirement, however, it's important to remember that back prior to the fund being established, our pension plan, our national pension plan, risked going into bankruptcy. And so the returns that are being realized through CPP Investments certainly contribute to the security and stability of predicting what your CPP will be on retirement. At the same time, it's important to know that the plan gives back proportional to what each employee contributes over the course of their lifetime. And so that will vary across individuals depending on the contributions that they've made.
Maybe at the risk of giving a bit of a history lesson, even going back to the creation of the Canada Pension Plan, at that time, almost 50% of Canadians lived in poverty. And through the Canada Pension Plan and other social programs across the country, Canada now has one of the lowest rates of poverty among seniors. And CPP has certainly evolved over that time, including the creation of CPP Investments, and also recently in 2019, the creation of the enhanced CPP. And it's probably worth also mentioning that the most recent report from the chief actuary did confirm that CPP is sustainable for another 75 years, at least.
Thank you, John. So why don't we go now? We have some questions that we've received via video in advance. So we'll go to one from Sharon from Newfoundland now.
Sharon Callahan, President, CARP Newfoundland and Labrador Chapter. The CPP is one of many pension funds and sovereign funds that seek out productive and sustainable investment opportunities. There are many funds that are chasing the same investment opportunities. How does the CPP deal with these competitions?
John, that's probably one for you.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Sharon, for the question. And you're absolutely correct. We do operate in very competitive markets, and maybe I'll just take the opportunity to share how we compete. even beyond investing in sustainability, but how we just compete in general across the global markets. And I do think that if our results, which people can see on our website, does highlight that we've been able to successfully compete. Since the inception of CPP investments, our 10-year returns of 10.3% hold up very well against most global institutional investors. And equally important, we've contributed $41 billion of cumulative dollar value added. So dollar value added is the money that's in the plan from active management, money that is in the plan in excess of just passive investing. So how we compete is really leveraging the organization's inherent and developed competitive advantages. So CPP Investments has an advantage of scale. At $523 billion of assets under management, we're one of the largest institutional investors in the world. And that gives us an opportunity to participate in transactions where there's just less crowded, where there's less competition. We also have the advantage of certainty of assets and time horizon, that we can find good opportunities, good companies, and invest in them and hold them as long as we believe they're good investments. In our infrastructure portfolio, we actually have investments that have been there for over 15 years, and we've just compounded the growth of those companies over the past decade and a half. And we aren't beholden to some arbitrary disposition timeframe. And these are real competitive advantages in a market that is increasingly short-term focused. We've also, over the past 15 plus years, been developing real internal expertise with respect to investing in different geographies, with respect to investing in different asset classes. And as part of that, developed relationships with top institutions around the world, which again gives us access to unique and at times proprietary opportunities.
Thank you for that. So our next question comes from Natasha in Manitoba. She says, how are CPP funds safeguarded from a government with cash flow and financial problems? Heather, did you want to touch on this?
Well, it gets back to our original legislation that defines us as arm's length from political interference. And I think we're quite unique in the world as a national pension fund that has a single purpose, which is optimizing returns without undue risk of loss. And at the same time, expressing that mandate through a global business investment lens. And it would be impossible to succeed, as John's just described, in doing that if we were subject to governments coming in and saying we need money for this or we need money for that. Going back to Gwen's original question, the insecurity then of knowing that you could count on what was coming down the line for you based on your contributions would be very unstable. And so it's something I have to say the board is very proud of and diligent with respect to, and that is maintaining the arm's length independence from government interference.
Thank you. So why don't we go to another video question? If so there's a question that's come in from Laura Zink. We can play that now.
Hello, my name is Lara Zink. I am President and CEO of Women in Capital Markets. Thank you for inviting me to participate today. CPP Investments has a strong commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, and WCM commends you for that. Given that women leaders are leaving their companies at record rates, the highest we've ever seen, what ED&I initiatives is CPP Investments focused on to attract and retain female talent?
Great. John, do you want to start with that, and then I'll talk about it from a governance perspective?
Yeah, no, that'd be great. And it's fair to say that equity, diversity, and inclusion is a priority across the entire organization. How we run the company, how we manage the portfolio, and governance. And spend a little bit of time on how we run the company and how we manage the portfolio. But it's all grounded in a fundamental belief that diversity leads to better decisions and better business outcomes. So within the organization, we have ambitions, goals for diversity, and diversity across multiple dimensions. Gender, minority, LGBTQ+, people with disabilities. And we have these goals with respect to recruiting, retention, development. And we've seen a lot of progress over the past few years on the recruiting side. In fact, recently, our recent stats are 50% from a gender diversity perspective for new hires. But that's not enough. And I think the question highlights it's more than just recruiting. It's retaining, developing, and promoting a diverse workforce, really allowing people to come to work, be their true selves, and have a successful, fulfilling career. So we've been implementing and have implemented formal mentorship programs and, equally important, real sponsorship programs within the organization. With respect to managing the portfolio, again, we have the same expectations of the companies in our portfolio. And an area that we have been focused on for years is diversity at the board. And in our public equity portfolio, we actually use our votes. And we vote against director nominations if there's not adequate diversity, and right now specifically gender diversity on the board.
Great, and maybe I'll just talk a bit about it then, both from a board oversight perspective with respect to equity, diversity, and inclusion, employment practices and supports across the enterprise, and then the board itself. Maybe I'll start with the board. The very first employee of CPPIB, as it was back then, was a woman, Gail Cook Bennett, who was the first chair of the first board of CPPIB. And we've had, I think, a remarkable record when you think of us as an organization that expresses our mandate uniquely through a global business investment lens, that we've had 50% women at least on the board throughout that period and do to this day. There's been a strong interest on the part of the board to ensure that management, certainly at the executive level, but across the enterprise, is very engaged with us. Yes, on gender, but as John said, not only on gender. And I would say there's again been a very good collaboration over the period that I've been on the board to increase the total enterprise engagement on making sure that we're doing everything we can to attract the very best talent. And that means a diverse group who have equitable access of talented people to working for the firm. And that, as John said, from internships to the supports as at the entry level right through. And we're proud of the success, but we're not complacent. This is an area where we want to keep pushing further, and as I say, beyond gender.
Thank you. So our next one, John, I think this will be for you, and it comes from Dan in Halifax, who's asking, how is CPPIB positioning its portfolio to withstand our inflationary environment and a possible recession next year?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a great question, and one that is very topical. Certainly inflation is impacting all Canadians. And maybe I'll just share a little bit about how we build the portfolio and how we think about building the portfolio to be resilient across lots of different inflationary environments, interest rate environments. Mm-hmm. And we have a fundamental belief in the value of diversification. And we build a diversified portfolio that is diversified across asset classes, whether that be private equity, public equity, credit, infrastructure, and diversified across the globe. And certainly we're seeing high inflation in some areas in the world and actually lower inflation in other parts of the world. And so that's the value of diversification. So at $523 billion, what is just really key is to build a portfolio that's resilient through a wide range of macroeconomic conditions. Mm-hmm. There are specific asset classes such as infrastructure, where we do have a large infrastructure portfolio where there may be some inflation protection within the portfolio, and they're doing very well right now. But overall, we think about how do we build the portfolio through a wide range of inflationary environments.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Elaine in Alberta. She says, Alberta is threatening to make over CPP to make it a provincial program like Quebec. I don't want to participate in an Alberta-run pension program. What are my options?
Yeah, I'll share a little bit that CPP is a joint provincial federal plan. And in fact, the stewards of the plan are all the provincial finance ministers and then the federal finance minister. And the provinces have the right to ask these questions, and the people of Alberta will come to a view on what the best path forward is. Our job, my job, is to deliver value for the 21 million Canadians that are contributors and beneficiaries of the Canada Pension Plan, including the 3 million that live in Alberta. I would look at our past performance of 10.3% over 10 years, which, as I mentioned, really does stack up well against almost any global institutional investor, and the $41 billion of cumulative dollar value add. There's value in being in a large national plan There's value of risk pooling, and there's value of scale, the ability to compete on a global basis.
Thank you. So our next question comes from Pierre, who says, can you explain how geopolitical risks and human rights issues in China influence your investment decisions in the region? Do you plan to invest more or less in the country in the coming years? John, did you want to start on this one as well?
Yeah, I'll be happy to start on, and I'd say geopolitics right now is top of mind for management and the board. We have gone into a period where geopolitics is certainly elevated, and geopolitics all over the world is certainly elevated. And maybe I'll share a little bit about how we think about being a global investor. And the decision was made 15 years ago that as CPP investments grew in assets under management, it was important to invest those funds in a globally diversified portfolio and to invest those funds in the large economies in the world. It provides diversification, which we've talked a little bit about. It also broadens the opportunity set. We're an active investor. We're looking for really interesting investment opportunities where we can see excess return. The broader the opportunity set, the more opportunities we can find. And we also believe it's important to invest in the drivers of global growth and take emerging markets as an example. Emerging markets are a big component of global GDP today, and they're growing. And in the future, they're going to be increasingly approaching 50% of global GDP. And it's important to participate in these sources of global growth. So we've invested a lot of time in building out the understanding, the relationships, the capabilities, the infrastructure to invest in the largest economies in the world, with the view that this is in the best interest of contributors and beneficiaries today and in the future, and to ensure that we do have that global perspective and those global capabilities. Now, that's how we think about it from a top down. I'll just very briefly talk about how we then build the portfolio from the bottom up. That in the active portfolio, every investment goes through a very rigorous fundamental analysis. And that analysis is more than just what's the return. It's more than just what do we think the return will be in the near term. What do we think the long-term prospects are of this company or this investment, including putting it through an environmental, social, and governance lens, with the view that companies that are leaders in environmental, social, and governance are consistent with our long-term investment approach.
Great, and I might just add to that, that was a very comprehensive response, John. I might just add to that from a board perspective, and again, I have some history to look at. When I came to the CPPIB board, we had a very competent risk assessment model. But as we grew from domestically invested dominantly, passively invested dominantly, to globally and actively invested, it was really clear that we needed to have a rethink of our risk, whole risk enterprise assessment and approach to managing that. And so over a couple of years, in a great collaboration again with management, we've developed a risk enterprise framework that's well detailed in our annual report that has a number of new dimensions, and geopolitics is certainly one of those. And it gets calibrated in real time, again, to make sure that the board, as well as management who are doing this day in and day out, are deeply engaged with deep dives, is what we call them, sometimes on our own as a board, sometimes with management, to really look at geopolitical risk in particular, given the prominence that it has today.
So our next question comes from Ryan in Ontario, who says, the virtual and in-person public meetings are a good start in terms of educating the public on how, why, what, who, when, and where CPP operates and works. What is the ongoing public communications communications engagement and education strategy? John, did you want to start on this?
Yeah, happy to start. And I think transparency is really important. It's really important to who we are. And as was highlighted earlier, we are globally recognized for the level of disclosure and transparency. So other resources that I would encourage people to access, first is our website. Our website has a tremendous amount of information on who we are, what we do, how we invest, including publishing our holdings once a year. We also have the annual report, which there's links to, and the report on sustainable investing. which are very comprehensive reports that go through our approach to risk management, governance, sustainability. We have our public service announcements through the country that we've been running. And we also have the recently launched Investment Insights Institute, where we're publishing thought pieces on really important topics such as sustainability. And I'd say finally, myself and other members of the senior management team, we do actively go across this country and give public presentations.
Yeah. And I'd say these meetings themselves are a great expression of that, having just crossed the country with in-person meetings happily, and then having this opportunity for a national virtual meeting. I have to say it's just a pleasure getting back in person with our stakeholders, and it's something that as chair I have the privilege to participate in as well.
And the documents that John referenced, so the annual report and the sustainable investing report, there's a resources tab on the left-hand side of your screen where they're all available in addition to on our website, as he mentioned. So our next question comes from Mike in Kitchener, who says, how can Canadians be confident that the CPP-IB portfolio is on track to achieve its net zero emissions by 2050 if CPP-IB doesn't have interim emissions reduction targets? Is there any openness for CPP-IB to put in place interim targets starting in 2025? Did you want to start, John?
Yeah, I'll start, and I think it's a great opportunity to also share the engagement again with the board and management. And I think this is an area we're really, sustainability in general, it's an area we're really excited about. And really excited about it because of the opportunities that will present themselves. We, earlier this year, made our net zero commitment. But I think it's important to highlight that CPP Investments has been a leader in sustainability prior to that, and a real leader in thinking about transition risk, physical risk, and how to incorporate the risk side into our investment decisions. But we started to really look at it about a year and a half ago as a tremendous investment opportunity, as the global economy needs to transition to net zero. And this is about the entire economy transitioning to net zero, not just a transition of conventional energy to renewable, all sectors in the economy. And this is going to require considerable amounts of capital. We see quotes of 50, 60, 70 trillion dollars. And it will require patient, long duration capital, which is exactly the capital we have at CPP Investments. So earlier this year, we made our announcement of our net zero commitment. And a few things I would highlight about our net zero commitment. Portfolio will be net zero by 2050. Our internal operations will be carbon neutral by March 31st of 2023. We will double our green and transitions assets in the portfolio to 130 billion by 2030. And we are going to be an active, engaged investor in the global economy transition, supporting companies as they transition, investing in companies as they transition, recognizing that oil and gas companies, cement, steel, historically high emitting sectors need to also make the transition to a low carbon future. Now, on the specific question around short-term targets, right now we're of the view that it's going to be a bit of a nonlinear transition. And where we can have the biggest impact is to actually be a constructive investor and work with companies in decarbonization.
Yeah, and I'd add to that a lot of exciting things on the innovation side as well. And of course, the board does and will be working very closely with management to understand how and where targets and performance are linked, and to be very transparent in our learning in that regard.
Thank you. So our next question comes from Karen, and it sounds like she was at one of our in-person meetings recently. She says, you mentioned at a regional meeting that there was no CPP-IB investments in Russia. Were there any investments in Russia in February 2022 or at any point before or after? And what Russian investments were divested or dropped? How were these decisions made? And she's also asking if CPP-IB has any investments in Ukraine currently.
So to address the Russia question, a decision was made at CPP Investments going on, it may have been 10 years ago. It was quite a while ago, that Russia was not a market that we were going to invest in the active portfolio. And we had lots of areas that we were focusing on, and we were prioritizing resources into other geographies in the world. And due to the ESG, the environmental, social, and governance criteria that I mentioned, Russia was not a market that we invested in. So within the active portfolio, we actually didn't have positions. And with respect to Ukraine, we can get back on that question.
Okay, thank you. Our next question comes from Randolph in Nova Scotia, who says, how much has the recent market downturn affected returns on CPP investments, and how much does CPP asset allocation lessen such events?
So as of the end of the first quarter of this year, we had $523 billion in assets under management. And one area of emphasis for CPP investments is long-term performance. We don't build the portfolio for quarterly performance. We build it for long-term performance, long-term resilience. And with the 10-year return of 10.3%, it really highlights the resilience of the portfolio through a prolonged period of time. For the first quarter of fiscal 23, which ended in June of this year, we're not immune to the market volatility, and we had a negative 4.2% return. So we did have a negative return for that quarter, but that was well in excess of the global public markets, which in some cases had sold off into the teens. And I come back to diversification and really the importance of diversification across geographies and asset classes. And we can see that today. We can see some geographies doing well, some not doing as well, and asset classes that some asset classes not doing as well, but other asset classes, as I mentioned, infrastructure, where you have inflation protection, doing really well. Sustainability, where there's tremendous demand for renewables projects, they're doing really well. So having that diversified portfolio where some assets are doing well, where others might not be, I think that's the key to a resilient portfolio.
Thank you. So our next question comes from Faisal in Ontario. Why do the CPP Basic and the CPP Enhanced funds have different investment strategies? Did you want to start us off again,
Sure.
John?
Yeah, I can start off, and I'll try not to be overly technical on the answer. So the base CPP, we would refer to it as the base CPP. That's the CPP that's been in place since the 1960s. And since the 1990s, it's been a hybrid plan, whereas contributions come out, the majority of those contributions go immediately out to pay benefits, and CPP investments invest the surplus funds that are not needed to currently pay benefits, and we invest them and we grow to the $523 billion we have today. In 2019, the provinces and the federal government came together to enhance CPP, and they've been phasing it in over the past 5 years to create an enhanced CPP. Now, this is slightly different in that it is a fully funded pension plan. People will get out of it, in many ways, what they put into it, but investing in it today, and it'll grow over time. So the base CPP and the enhanced CPP, slightly different structures, and they have slightly different risk profiles. And that risk profile is also based on a principle of no intergenerational wealth transfer between the two. So we have different risk profiles. They're managed slightly differently. But I would highlight that we do, on a periodic basis, review the risk profile of both of the plans.
Thank you. Do you want to add
I would just say
anything?
that the board was very involved in an effort to assess the implications of taking on the enhanced fund for CPP investments, and involved in with management creating the oversight of how they were working, and certainly has approved the differential investment approach. And it does seem to be a good way of, as you say, addressing the intergenerational inequities that existed.
Our next question comes from Brandy, who's apologizing that she joined the meeting late, so she's not sure if she missed this question, but she actually hasn't. And she's saying, with regard to the Foundation for Risk framework for assessing potential investments, does it allow for CPPIB investments to invest in blockchain or crypto? If so, what aspects or types of companies? John, did you want to?
Well, I'll talk about the risk framework. And again, I think this was a great collaboration between the board and management in the development of our integrated risk framework. And integrated risk framework goes across all different dimensions and applies to how we build the portfolio, the amount of risk we'll take within the portfolio, and then even going down into individual security selection. I think it's been a tremendous accomplishment for the organization over the past few years of continuing to enhance our risk management practices. Now, from an investment perspective, we will look at all major asset classes and all major investment opportunities in the world. And as you can imagine, we get lots of questions on crypto, but it is not an area that we've invested in. We spent a lot of time trying to learn about it because it is a big market. It's a multi-trillion-dollar market. So we have a lot of knowledge on crypto, but we've never invested in crypto.
Yeah, and I would say, just as an augment to that, that we are interested, of course, in blockchain approaches and analytics, and stay au courant with that.
Okay. So Heather, I think this next question will be primarily for you. It comes from Margaret. She says, 3 members of CPPIB's board of directors are simultaneously corporate directors of fossil fuel companies. How can CPPIB be legally responsible for investing in my best long-term interests at the same time that they are involved in these fossil fuel companies?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for it. It goes back to really how we choose our directors, the process we go into, and that involves, at the point of assessing candidates, really looking at potential conflicts, how to manage those, and choosing candidates whom we recommend for appointment, who have the ability and the priority to really respect the mandate of CPPIB. In addition to that, of course, we have quarterly oversight on with expression by every director of what they're involved in, and making sure that we're not allowing things to slip in that regard. But I would say with the sophistication and experience of the directors we have, there is just a built-in muscle instinct to manage for a conflict, and that gets, we get reassured in that regard on the basis of quarterly reporting. And the fact that if a director is moving off of something or onto something else, that they come and seek permission from us to do that.
Thank you.
It's a good question.
And maybe we'll go to another one on climate, because we are still getting quite a few. So Dennis asks, why is CPP investing in fossil fuels when carbon emissions are causing climate disruption? John, is there something you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, and I think as we've highlighted, that we spent a lot of time thinking about our approach to sustainability and thinking about the entire global economy transition. We've also believed that divestment is not the path forward, that the path forward is engagement. And the path forward is engaging with companies across the economy, including the oil and gas sector, who will continue to play an important role and continue to play, in gas in particular, an important role in the global economy transition to net zero. And just there's a tremendous amount of scientific engineering know-how within the oil and gas sector that will be very constructive and valuable in this energy transition.
Okay. So this might be one you both might want to touch on. Carolina says, how does CPP Investments mitigate and manage ever-growing cybersecurity risks? Heather, would you like to kick us off?
Well, I think this does get back to our management approach.
Yeah, I think another.
So the board is interested. We have the risk framework that has us touching on it, and again doing deep dives with management. But what management presents to the board, I think, is really at the heart of this question.
Yeah, and cyber has been on the top of many companies' agenda now for a few years, and it's probably escalated in importance due to the events this year. So we have been continuously, as most people are, improving our cyber preparedness, including how one would react if you did have a cyber attack. Maybe one thing I would highlight is we actually recently did a kind of, what do you call it, a deep dive, a simulation, a tabletop exercise on cyber to ensure that the senior management team actually understood how a cyber attack could occur, what would be the implications, and then how to resolve it. So something I think we do take very seriously.
Maybe, Tara, one of the things that's worth saying in this context with our national audience is that the depth and breadth of the work of the employees of CPP Investments is extraordinary. And the emphasis on having high-performing talent in the context of our equity, diversity, and inclusion goals, which we believe enhances that, is tremendous. And the board regularly has, in our meetings, which occur many times over the year, touch points. And cybersecurity would be one of those touch points where we never let up. And I have to say again that when we go into these areas of, all of the investment portfolio work, when we do deep dives, we see the tremendous and comprehensive and sophisticated work done by the investors and the investment leaders and the executive team oversight. But geopolitics, cybersecurity, these other elements that are now part of the risk framework are regularly revisited between the board and management. And that's where our transparency and accountability really feature. And we're having that recognized globally as should be a source of comfort to our contributors and beneficiaries.
Thank you for that. And I see we're under 10 minutes to the top of the hour, so probably 2 or 3 more questions, and then we'll get into conclusions. Peter from Quebec is asking, what is CPP's investment strategy in regards to investing in Canada? How much of the fund is invested in Canada and how?
Yeah.
John, could I just set that up a little bit by saying that when I had my first meeting of the board in January of 2011, appointed at the end of 2010, and at that time, we were dominantly invested in Canada, and we were dominantly passively invested. And it was over the course of my first years as a director that we changed that strategy. And I wonder, I think the public would be interested in why that transition happened and where we're at with it now.
Yeah, happy to. And today, just to share the percentage of the portfolio in Canada, it's around 15-16% of the portfolio is in Canada today. To put that into context, Canada's GDP on a global basis is about 3%. So Canada continues to be a really important market for CPP investments, continues to be a market we are very much overweight on a global basis, and teams are actively looking for investment opportunities. But as we've been growing the organization and growing the portfolio, as mentioned earlier, for the long-term sustainability, it's important that we are a global investor. It's important that we have the assets invested across asset classes and across geographies and really capture those sources of global growth. And the net income numbers that we quoted earlier, 300 plus billion of net income over 10 years, that's all net income that flows back into the country and into ultimately to contributors and beneficiaries. So Canada is an important market, and we have some of our largest actual investments in Canada, including some in Ontario, some in Alberta, and across the country.
And I might just add that every one of those decisions over my period on the board has been management making the case to the board about why to move. And one of the things that may not seem intuitive is that you have to take risks and you have to diversify, as John said, to actually meet our mandate.
Yeah, and we're here to maximize return without undue risk of loss. And we really do look to drive long-term value of the CPP fund in the best interest of contributors and beneficiaries.
Thank you. So this is one, John, I think clarifying on something that you had said earlier. So Brian is asking, is the base portfolio actively managed or just the improved? And I think he means the enhanced portfolio.
Yeah, they're both actively managed. Yeah, to be clear, they're both actively managed. The difference between the two would be the risk profile and based on time horizon and the structure of the plan, how much risk is within each plan, but they are both actively managed.
Okay, great. Our next question, is hedging done to mitigate the risks of the fall in a Canadian dollar versus the US dollar?
Oh,
interesting.
It's a good question. Yeah. And today we have always had a view that we actually don't hedge currencies. At the broadest level, we don't hedge currencies. A view that part of being a global investor is to be exposed to global economies, including global currencies, actually. So we actually don't hedge. And in the Canadian dollar in particular, we actually have it largely unhedged between the US and Canada, with a view also that itself is a hedge, is a risk reduction strategy, that during times of market sell-off, there's a flight to the US dollar, and the US dollar strengthens. and that provides an uplift in the portfolio when the markets are going down. And when the economies are robust, the Canadian dollar is strengthening. So it provides a bit of a hedge against market risk.
Thank you. I'm looking at the clock. I think this is going to be our final question, and then we'll go into some concluding remarks. So Ted is asking, is there an index fund available to investors to match CPP Investments portfolio?
Oh,
that's a good one.
That's a good one.
It's a new one.
Yeah. So not to my knowledge, there is not. And our reference portfolio, essentially how we think about the passive alternative is 85% global equities, 15% fixed income. It's a very, very challenging reference portfolio. It really does capture global growth. That would be the passive alternative. But as I mentioned earlier, the $41 billion of cumulative dollar value added, that's the incremental value from active management.
Right.
And I would say there are long-term perspective, a long-term horizon on our investments is something that not every investor would have the opportunity to live to.
Great. So as mentioned, I think we're running out of time, so maybe we'll just do some concluding remarks before we wrap up. John, did you want to kick us off with some conclusions?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tara. Now, we do expect the year ahead will continue to bring some challenges, but we are confident in our ability to continue to invest the CPP fund for the long term. Our team of world-class professionals in 9 global offices are dedicated to growing the fund for the benefit of Canadians, both today and tomorrow. I am truly honored to stand with them, and I remain optimistic about the future.
Heather, did you want to add some conclusions?
Yes, first of all, thank you to everyone who's participated. Terrific questions. And I want to conclude also with some general thoughts that for more than 2 decades, CPP Investments has successfully balanced these range of present-day realities with our multi-generational obligations. The knowledge and experience that we've acquired, both management and the board in the process, are amongst our most valuable assets as we continue to fulfill our promise to Canadians. And thank you all again for participating today.
So you both said thank you, but I'll just echo that thank you one last time, and thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate all the good questions and commentary. Please feel free to continue looking at the resources in that resource tab on the left-hand side of the screen, and also to reach out to us anytime at contact@cppib.com. Again, we hope you found this very informative, and we appreciate you attending.